Thank you for joining us today. It's May the 17th, and you are here joining us with Joanne Poole Blades. She is the program manager for Special Education Resolution Center since its inception in 2005. She also manages the day-to-day operations of the programs for due process and mediation in the special education for the state of Oklahoma. So I want to welcome Joanne, and we're also asking that everyone stay muted. We're using the chat feature. So as we go through and as she's presenting, if you have a question, please put it in chat. There's two of us that's monitoring, and we will make certain to get the questions to Joanne. Plus, I believe she probably has some time left over at the end. So again, welcome to Joanne Blades.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. I hope you ask a lot of questions. I almost know what questions will be asked ahead of time. So I'm prepared to answer, and I understand this very well from many aspects. I am a sibling and a family member of someone with schizophrenia. And so I grew up with the issues of mental health and the impact on the family. I'm still living it today, where she's 70 years old and we have her in a assisted living center, and we still deal with her behaviors all these years later. I'm a parent of a child, a grandparent actually, that had guardianship of a child with autism. And I raised her and went through the school struggles. On top of all that, my background is really that I was a teacher for 16, 17 years, depending on what years you count. And then became an attorney, and I actually represented parents for about 10 years doing due process cases. I felt the system was very broken. I started consulting with the Oklahoma Commission on Children and Youth on legislative issues, because in my heart's desire, what I really wanted to do was help the system. I didn't find that due process really did help the system. It sometimes helped that one child, but I didn't see a lot of systemic change from that. And so I began looking at ways to help with systemic change, and had the opportunity to apply for this job in 2005. And I now work for Oklahoma State University. For the last 15 years, we have helped parents with Iep facilitation, mediation. We've done a lot of reforms to the programs we have in due process, as well as our early intervening process. And I'm very familiar with this. I've lived these issues all my life, experienced it as a parent. So the things I'm going to share with you are very personal to me as well. I know the struggles that can be there, and we'll talk a little bit about how you might approach that and ways that you might be able to make it better. So generally, I entitled this PowerPoint, The Roles of a Parent. And what does it mean to be an advocate for my child? Those are really two important issues, parents and advocacy, and they often bump into each other. So we're going to explore a little bit about what that means. Okay, I love my kiddo. That's what every parent, the center of everything. They are your life, your world. You don't want to see anything bad happen to them. You want their best possible outcome. That's what parents want, the best possible. Schools are not they're not required under the law to provide the best possible. They have to provide what's appropriate to make educational benefit. And I think that's what really sets up the conflict right away, is that you're looking for the best, but they don't have to provide the best. And how do you navigate that? How do you figure out where are their legal obligations? Are they meeting them? And how can you supplement them again on your own? And it's when you have a child, I mean, the truth is some children require different levels of support. And kids have all kinds of issues. You may be dealing with a child with ADHD, which while is not considered as serious a mental health issue as maybe schizophrenia or autism, it's just as problematic. Because they have problems with organization, they have problems with attention, they still have the emotional up and down that a lot of kids have. And while they have this lesser identity label to the school, it can be just as impactful as a serious mental health disorder. So it's very, it doesn't matter what your label is, it's how the child's needs are impacting the environment. Because a child could be, oh, sorry, whoops, I'm going too fast. A child's, I got myself offline. Hold on, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So a child's label, even though they're schizophrenic, they may be on medication, they may be dealing with things better, and a kid with ADHD may have more needs than a kid with schizophrenia. And that's all really kind of hard for the school to understand. The other thing that's really important for parents to understand is that teachers absolutely have not come out of educational training with in-depth understanding of mental health disorders. Some people have, and I think I was one of those people because I had it, maybe because I had a sister that had schizophrenia, but I was understanding. I could tell as a person when behavior was purposeful and when it was not. But I worked with many other school personnel that didn't see that. They understood what they expected children to do, the rules, and when you didn't fit into that, it was really hard. And part of your biggest challenge will be the education and training of the school people that are working with your student. I love this slide. The cartoon is really not that clear, but it's the way we feel. For kids that have differences, it's like being a square peg trying to fit in that round hole. And your child is going to face challenges that aren't experienced by other children, maybe even other children in your family. But you, as their primary caregiver, their parent, you need to develop the additional skills and strategies so that you can support them. You're not going to be able to be at school. You're not going to be able to micromanage what happens at school. That's just not allowable. They have an obligation under law, and their obligation is to provide, once that child is on an IEP, to provide an IEP reasonably calculated to provide some educational benefit in light of the child's individual circumstances. If your child is on a 504, they provide accommodations, but they must provide those accommodations as if there were no mitigating measures. That means that they have to look at your child as if they didn't have any medication. And what is the worst possible place that child would be in? What accommodations would they need? It's not what accommodations they get now that they're on meds and in counseling and doing all these things. It's when they're not on that. So keep that in mind. That may be something important to help the school understand. And if they don't understand it, you can always call our office. We intervene for parents. Parents call us and they talk to us about the problems they're having. If the parent wants, we can intervene with the school and try to figure out what the problem is. Is it that the teachers don't understand, the teachers are afraid? I mean, there can be a variety of things, and we don't mind helping you fix that kid because those kids are stuck. As a parent, how many hats do you wear? I mean, you are everything, right? You're the cook, the taxi man, you do everything. And one of those roles, just one of them, is advocate. And what is an advocate? Some people think of an advocate as a fighter, and it's so much different than that. What is an advocate for your child? Love that picture. An advocate means that you are the champion of your child's success. You promote your child's needs, and you are the primary spokesperson for your child. And if you're a caregiver, if you're a wraparound service person here or someone that's supporting parents, I don't know why that did that. I didn't touch anything. That threw me off again. Sorry. You are the person who is going to help them understand your child. And sometimes they're a little resistant to know. Sometimes schools will be like, yeah, we know. This is all we're required to do. But the truth is, as a parent, you understand your child's needs. Now, I will say that there are times that you will understand your child's needs so well that you adapt to their needs before it's a problem. So I hear parents who say to me, well, I don't have that problem at home. And I will say to them, yes, but you know that if you take them into the store, I remember when I was raising my granddaughter, she was obsessed with cooking. And I couldn't even take her to Kmart. I remember one day we went to Kmart, and where her sister, I said, you can have something for $10 or less. Well, she didn't understand. She didn't care. She latched on to some $75 stove, and she wasn't leaving that store without that stove. And we had this horrible meltdown. Well, I just learned in the future, don't take her to Kmart. I mean, you adapt as a parent, and you may not even realize it. The school doesn't know that yet. They haven't had those experiences to adapt. And how you can help them learn from their experiences that they have with that child can be important. I can remember my child when she got to be a teenager, melting down, banging her head, thinking, do I call the police? Do I call an ambulance? What am I going to do here? I felt so helpless and out of control. School people feel the same way. And when they do, they just freak out. And parents freak out, but you have that incentive to wake up the next day and you're going to fight because that's your kid. The school gets scared and they start worrying, how's this going to disrupt the environment? What's it doing to our school? And they don't have enough knowledge and training to really sort through those answers. And we're going to deal with kind of how you do that in the future. Remember that first and foremost, there's the mama bear syndrome. And we see it from grandparents too. We see, don't mess with my kids. What drives parents is this protection and fear of what's going to happen to hurt that child. And it doesn't matter how that kid gets. Those of you who have older children, my children are like 45, and I'm the same way. Don't mess with my kids. Don't mess with my grandchildren. I mean, nothing riles me up better than something that's hurting them. And you have to learn how to calm yourself and to let your child know that your child has to learn to be their own advocate too. And there's a way to do that. So how do you fight with this child? Advocacy is not really fighting in the sense of hitting people. It's an advocating. It's champion their needs, champion for the child. So how do you fight without hitting? First, you have to understand the rules, which I think a lot of parents don't. Special education, I joke and say, is the best kept secret in Oklahoma. You have to learn about your child. Why is your child behaving the way they are? How does your child's disability affect their functioning? You have to learn that. Do not expect the school to really understand that. They may know parts of it, and that's going to depend on how many kids they've had like your child before. If your child is the first one, they're probably on a blank slate. But you need to understand they are moving from a position of not really understanding. You have to share information about your child with the team. And sometimes they have willing ears. Sometimes I've heard stories where they are not as willing, but you still need to share information or help them find sources for their own. And generally when I talk to school, I do a lot of trainings with schools. I think if you take away the problems, the fighting, they really want to know. They really want things to go better at school for your child and for them, but they sometimes feel threatened, and we're going to get into that. Ask what you can do at home to support, or how you can work with your child at home. Because a lot of times what we find is the school is trying to do one thing with the child at school, And the parent may not understand the importance of following up and having those consistent rules there. And so sometimes it's the other way around. A therapist has told a parent about things to do at home, and the parent knows that it needs to be consistent at school too. And sometimes they hear willing ears when they talk, and sometimes they don't. And those are the problems. And we want the schools, we want parents to learn how to partner with the school against the problem. We don't want it to be the parent against the school. We want it to be the parent and the school against the problem. And that's really what the goal is, so that you can work together. And you've got to learn to work with your team. I love this picture. I hate everyone. Okay, if you come in with a defensive mode and hate everyone, they're going to dread meeting with you. You've got to try to find that humanity in the people that you work with. If you go in and attack them, you come at them like this in an IEP meeting, they're going to defend themselves. They're going to take a defensive posture, and you're not working with each other. One thing I thought about is, if you could turn it around and see it as if they called you into a meeting and said, we don't like your parenting style. We are going to call DHS. We are going to turn you into the parenting police. We're calling our attorneys because we don't like the way you're choosing for your bedtime with your child. We think it needs to be a different time. How would you feel as a parent? You would think, what the heck? I'm furious. I'm not helping. What are they after me? That's kind of how they feel when you come in and just attack them. So you have to be very careful about how you advocate and how you can do it in a nice way. And sometimes it's hard. I'm going to tell you, I can share some stories how hard it can be. So what can you do? You have to start with the right motive in your heart. And you say, what does that mean, my right motive? Is your motive to get a piece of hide? Is your motive to get somebody fired? Is your motive to fire the superintendent, fire the special education director, fire that teacher? If that's your motive, you're going to lose from the beginning, because you can't do that. You don't have the power to do that. What your motive should be is to help you and the team get on the same page about your child's mental health disorder. You need to work as a team. You've got to problem solve together. Try to keep it simple. Team tag. Come up with something about sometimes, I can remember when I was teaching and I worked with kids that they had different mental health disorders. And there was one day I walked into a room and there was probably only 4 or 5 little boys in there, and they were in middle school. And one of them had 2 funnels on his chest and he was singing like a virgin, like a virgin. And I just looked at him and I thought, it just like the last straw on it, just snapped. I called the counselor and I said, can somebody come help me? Because I can't do this anymore today. I had to team tag. Somebody come get this kid for a minute, because I had been dealing with that so long. And at that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. But see, it wasn't about me. I could have just lost it and gone off on the kid, but it was that I was losing it. So I needed a team tag. And you need to see your team as human. People that are on this team, they are all human beings. And as you work with them, they're going to try to act very professional. And sometimes that's really a problem because they don't seem very real, but they are human. And what scares you scares them. And when you start accusing each other and scaring each other, the whole situation just gets worse and worse until you don't even want to be in the same room together. And that's not where we want to go. We need to learn to communicate effectively, to listen, not to hear, but to listen to what each side is saying. You need to listen to what they're saying and listen to what they must be meaning behind that. People will call me and they'll say, they told me that they don't want this child something. And I'll think, what does that mean? What happened? What are they afraid of? That's what I think. Not what has the child done, but what has scared these people? We are driven by fear. Parents are driven by fear. School people are driven by fear. And while you both walk in different shoes. You both have different responsibilities. So there's sort of a fear of how your child's disruption might affect their school process. How are they going to deal with the fallout of other parents who call and say, why is that kid in my kid's classroom? They're dealing with a lot of things you may not see. But you want to learn to listen. You want to learn to stick to the facts, and we'll talk more about that, and stay on track. If you can't do these things, you might need to call our center and ask for an Iep facilitation, because a facilitator that's neutral and goes in there, they keep people listening to each other. They handle conflict that may emerge, and they shrink it back down and get back to what is it we're here to do. They stay on track, and you're able to really get through and complete that IEP. And that's what that service is. We're very fortunate to have a state department that funds us for that, even though it's not a requirement of the IDEA. So it's something you should take advantage of. These are general premises that you really need to keep in mind. And I would say this as much to schools, and I do in their training. We know that educational outcomes are improved when families, schools, and working service providers work together effectively. The problem is how to do that. But we know kids' outcomes are better. The other thing is training and support helps us learn together and problem solve in ways that are more responsible to that kiddo's needs. And that's what we want you to do, not to fight against you in the school, but how can we get you in the school fighting against this problem out here? Because it's not just a problem for the school, it's a problem for the kid. And I'll explain more about what that means in a little bit. Listening. I can't tell you how important this is. Seek first to understand, then be understood. That is a very powerful statement that was written by Stephen Covey. And it means that when you're in that meeting and you listen to the school, you need to listen to understand, what are they trying to tell you? What are their fears? How are they trying to work this out? How can you be supportive of them as well? And seek to understand their position before you want them to understand you. And if that can teach them to do the same thing, you'll both be trying to serve each other's needs before just engaging in hostility. Is listening just hearing? And this just to highlight that listening doesn't just mean, well, I was in the meeting. It means following the thoughts and feelings of others, trying to understand what they're saying from their perspective, their frame of reference, or their point of view. What's underneath what they're saying? If they're proposing something for that child, what is it that they're trying to seek for all of their goals, and how is that going to affect your kid? And we'll talk again a little bit more about this. It is a very disciplined skill, because our human nature is to go to fight or flight. When we hear something we don't like, we're either going to pony up to fight back for our child, we're going to fight for our child, or we're going to run away. And sometimes parents don't know what to do. They become silent, they run away, they ignore the problem until it just blows up. And you really need to think listening is the first step to overcoming all of that. It is a very disciplined skill. It's something you have to acquire. You have to learn to suppress those immediate emotions of just, I've been there. And when you listen to them, it conveys dignity and respect to their position. And I hit this really hard with schools, that schools should listen to parents, listen to what is underneath what they're saying, and to really try to figure out where that parent is coming from and be able to talk about it. I think sometimes they are able to hear it, but then they just shut down with their emotions. So it's like we're all human beings just struggling with the human nature of who we are. But I do think it does convey to parents dignity and respect to listen to their point of view. And this communication loop, I'm going to I love this. My accessibility person says I'm going to have to change this a little bit, but I hate it. There is a communication loop that goes on. There is a sender of a message and a receiver of that message. And there are filtering lenses. So there is a lens that filters what they're saying. So when the sender says, I want my child to be in the regular classroom with typically developing peers, the receiver could be hearing all kinds of different things. Oh my gosh, we don't have enough support for that child to be in the regular classroom. She's asking us for something we can't do. There's these filtering lenses. So they may be hearing something totally than what you're saying. Because while you may want a plan to get them back, or more opportunities for those kids to be back in a setting, or is there a plan to gently move them or work on their behavior so they can be there? People hear different things than you might be saying. So you want to be sure, check in on them with communication, that they heard what you were communicating. You really want them to talk to you about what their filter was saying. And that takes safety. And we do it through what's called reflective listening. I mean, those are just terms, evidence-based things we have to talk about. But what that means is thinking about what they're saying and asking questions back. And rather than that school saying, oh, she's asking us for something we can't do, I would rather that receiver think, okay, what is your goal in having him in more regular classrooms? So that you could say, well, I want him to be around his peer group, or he's not wanting to be segregated. Maybe you can use that desire to be in the regular classroom as a reward for some of his behavioral accomplishments. I mean, there's ways that you can work together to try to achieve what the child is needing, what the school is needing, and how you can work together. And it is done through something called reflective listening. Listening, thinking about what the person is saying, and then asking questions back to make sure what they exactly mean. Not that you're assuming anything, because sometimes people call me and I will say to them, what is it you want the school to do? And as an educational professional, as I listened to the parent, I was clicking off maybe 20 things that I thought that parent wanted. And oftentimes parents will say back to me something rather simple. I just want my child to have friends. I just want my child to receive some acceptance at school. I just want my child to be able to attend school every day. And asking those questions are so important, to not assume what someone is saying, but to ask questions back. Listening is a disciplined skill. You can't do two things at once if one of them is listening. You need to be listening and thinking about what is being said. You can't listen if you're trying to figure out what you're going to say next. And this goes for you too. I mean, I teach it to schools, but you can't be listening. If you hear them say, we want to move your child to the resource room, if you are thinking in your filter, that's absolutely not going to happen, then that just sets you up. Listen, think about it. Why are they wanting that? Ask those questions. How is that going to help my child? How long will he be there? You have to think about, rather than trying to say back to fight, ask more questions. You don't want to assume, oh, they're just trying to get rid of him. That could be true in a few incidents. Usually they understand by now at this date and time that they have a responsibility. They're trying to meet the needs of all people. And so you're trying to ask questions back and forth. And I hope that's the point I'm really getting through, is that there needs to be discussion, because people will put something out and then everybody just kind of sucks air and goes to silence and takes their positions. And that's when it goes bad. There is something I just want to teach you about. It's positions and interests. Because as parents, you have come to a place where you're raising a child When something goes wrong in that child's life, you come up with how you're going to fix it. Well, when you're in special ed or working with a school, you have to come together to figure out how to fix it. You really won't be able to just give the solution because you really don't know if that solution works in the school environment. So what we typically do is we have a position, what we want. So we may come to the school and say, and I'll give you a real incident. I was working with a school one time and the parent called me and they said, I have just asked the school for everything and nothing works out. They don't help me. They're not working with me. It's horrible. I'll call the school and their first response is, we've done everything she asks. Everything she comes in here, we give her and we don't know what else to do. We can't make her happy. We give her something exactly what she wanted and she's still not resolved. And so what had happened is that the parent was with a kid that was ditching homework. They didn't want to do their homework and they had become pretty clever. And they probably had some organizational skills they knew that they could fall back on and use as an excuse. And they were saying things like, the child didn't have his homework and he was failing. And the parent was trying to fix that. So first she contacted the school and said, I want an assignment notebook. I must have an assignment notebook. And they said, fine, everybody gets an assignment notebook. Here's the assignment notebook. And then the parent 2 weeks later comes back and says, I want an email from teachers when my child is missing an assignment. And the school's like, okay, we'll set it up. You get an email when they're missing an assignment. And then 2 weeks later, I want daily phone calls and notes about what's happening with my child at school. Okay, here's the deal. The parent went in with their position, their demand, their positional demand. I want an assignment notebook. But they didn't talk about the interest. Why? What's underlying that demand? What interest are you trying to solve? And if they could go in and share their interests, I'm not able to help my son complete his homework because I don't know what assignments are. And he's not keeping up with it. Whether it's part of his disability, whether he's doing it on purpose, I don't know. And I need to know so I can make sure he's doing it at home. And that's the interest. And so when you can ask, when a parent comes in, or if you know you're going to make a positional demand, I want the child moved to this classroom. I want whatever you want, you need to share. It's so important to share why. Why are you wanting it? What is the interest that you're trying to resolve? What problem are you trying to resolve? Now, schools will do the same thing to you. They will come into an IEP meeting and they will make positional demands. We must move this child to a full-time regular education placement. And you want to know, you need to know. Do you see here? You need to know what interest are they solving? What is the problem that's going on? Because once you get to the interest, that's where negotiation begins. How can we meet their need and meet my child's needs? How can we negotiate this so that my son maybe needs a temporary break? Maybe they need the classroom to have a break and get him some skills to earn the right to come back and try something different and new. But you've got to be able to get into that place to negotiate. And you do that by something we call depositioning, which is actually questioning. So you're going to hear me talk about asking questions and sharing information a lot, because that's where we really go wrong in a lot of ways. This is my favorite slide. I don't know why it's blank first, but I love this. It's that underlying iceberg. And think about it. When you make a positional demand, you're going in at the top of the iceberg and you're saying, this is what I want. This is what has to happen. This is absolutely it. But you're not discussing what's under the water. And when you can discuss what's under the water and you're dealing with what's under the water, so they've said your child must go back to a full-time regular education placement, and you ask, what is the interest? What are you trying to achieve by that? So let's say it's disrupting the classroom, the classroom, their teacher's not able to teach. the teachers become very frustrated and doesn't know how to handle his behavior. He is acting out to get attention. He's acting out for reasons we don't understand. Maybe then you can go back and say, okay, what does the child need to be able to go back into the regular classroom to function? Do we need to get that teacher some behavioral training? Do we need to get behavioral training? Schools don't understand. They're getting there, but behavioral training isn't fixing the kid. The behavior specialist doesn't come in and fix the kid. They come in and teach the adults how to respond differently to the child so that the negative behaviors are extinguished and the positive functional behaviors are emphasized and put into place. So it gives you a time. Okay, maybe we'll agree to him being in a resource classroom for this long, but in the meantime, who's helping him change his behavior? What services or training are you giving the teacher to be prepared for him to come back? Those are the questions that you need to be in a place to ask. And that way you're negotiating things, because what you end up with, what we get the calls, they say my child is going to a resource room and say he can come back when he acts better. Well, my first question is, well, who's teaching him to do that? You know, who's intervening to make sure that happens? Because the school may be reacting to the immediate need of disruption, but not thinking about the long term, how to get that kid back in school, how to get them back to where they're learning the best. Children learn best, my opinion, it's my opinion, no one else's, in the regular classroom with appropriate supports. Now, there are some kids that don't. I'm not saying every single child, but I think the kids I worked with, I worked hard, even in the early 90s, doing co-teaching, because they could come to my room and they could be very successful, but they couldn't be successful in front of their peers. And I wanted their peers. That's what's important to kids. Once they're in 4th or 5th grade up, they care what their friends think. I needed them to go in a regular classroom, know the answers ahead of time, be able to be a functional student in that classroom. When the teacher asks a question, their hand goes up first with the right answer, so that they could feel proud in front of their peers and gain the respect that they're seeking. Because we all want the same thing, and that's to be respected by the people that are our peers. So how do we find these interests? It's really something you have to think a lot about it. In effect, finally, before you can get to these questions, you've got to deal with those motives. I know that when my little one, I call her Sammy, when she was in high school, she was a high-functioning autistic child, and by high school, we'd gotten her a lot of behavioral training and a lot of training. We've gotten her social skills training. We've done a lot. And by the time she got to high school, they just looked at her as normal. They just couldn't see the differences in her. And she was having meltdowns at home. And there were things, and I was so angry that they couldn't see it, that I couldn't be nice. I ended up calling the psychologist that saw my child, and she agreed to come to the meeting, and I really just had to be quiet. And what I was trying to tell them is, you can see the triggers. When she's not doing well, when something's really irritating her, you will see the trigger. And finally, the headmaster said, well, you're asking us to see something we're just not seeing. And finally, after I think listening, the biology teacher said, I think I know what she's talking about. Sometimes when people are talking in the room and Sammy's frustrated, she will just kind of gently slam her book shut. She doesn't make a big deal out of it, but she just kind of shuts it. And I think that's what she's saying, is that's an indication that she's fixing to go on overload. And I said, exactly, that's it. But I was so angry with them, I couldn't come in and ask questions, because all I could think was, you mean people who don't care anything about my child, how am I going to overcome this? I can't be there and you're not getting it. And I was just so frustrated. My motive was not in the right place. But I did have my psychologist to help me get that motive in the right place. What are we here to do? And she was just like, tone it down, Joanne. Just tone down the anger and let's work through. And really the way she could explain it, I think made a lot more sense than me. Because sometimes I think schools begin to feel that parents, in fact, I know they do, are just being defensive about their child's weakness, or they just don't want to see their child. And the truth is, the older children get, the less attentive teachers, I think, are to the needs of their humanity in the classroom. And that's just simply the dynamics of 7 classes a day, 30 kids going in and out all day long. And they're just not taking that moment to know what to look for. They're just trying to get through that hour and get their stuff taught, and they just lose time. It's not that they're evil. It's just that they really don't get it. Now, they will get it if they've had, a lot of times, if they've had a family member that has had a mental health condition or that same type of problem. If they've had a student before, they learn from the students they've had. And so we are seeing some progress in the area of behavior. It's slow. We've probably been working on it for a number of years at the statewide level to get training out there to people even understand what is the concept of behavior. Isn't just make that kid behave better. It's how do we work with that child? How do we motivate them? You know, all of these things. And these are questions to find out the interest of those positional demands the school gives. You have to ask, what is this person trying to satisfy? What's motivating them? What is the person trying to accomplish? What is that person is afraid of? That they're afraid if that demand isn't fulfilled, what's going to happen? Now, all of these will go for you as a parent. They also go for the school team and what's happening at school. All these questions apply. Parents, I find, are mostly driven by fear of what's going to happen. It's the fear. If this isn't addressed, if it doesn't get fixed, what's going to happen to my child, to the situation? How is it going to go? And it's really important to go there. So here's some important questions. I had some handouts that go with this PowerPoint, and one is the type of questions you can ask to give some more information about questions. We also, if you go to our website, which is www.okserc.org, and go to stakeholder training, we have some more things in our modules. We have a whole booklet on questions. What is the purpose of questions? Because questioning is a skill. We do whole trainings for our mediators just on asking questions. But when the school makes a positional demand, you would ask, why is that solution important to you? Joanne, why is it important for your yes?
Could you give that web address again, and I'll put it in the chat for everyone.
Okay, it's www.okserc.org. And that SERC is Special Education Resolution Center. So it's okserc.org. Okay, so we have, did you get it, Jerry?
Yes, it's in there.
Okay, thank you. So these are some sample questions. And you could ask this, why are you suggesting that you move my child to a resource room? What are the problems? What they say, well, he's not able to learn in the regular classroom. They're typically going to tell you how they think it's going to affect the child. But ask, how is that going? How has it been for the teacher in there? You know, if you're having struggle raising a child, they're going to have trouble teaching that child. I mean, it's just there. So let them know, hey, I raised this kiddo. I know how challenging he can be. What is he doing? How is the teacher handling that? What supports does that teacher need? Is there something I can get? You know, is there something you can do? Has that teacher, here, I love this question. Has that teacher exhausted her internal resources? Because that's what I tell school teachers to say to administrators. I have exhausted all of my internal resources. I need help from the outside. because teachers don't get behavioral training in college. That's slowly changing, and we're going to see that. Now it's offered at some universities as a, what do you call it, an optional class. They don't have to take it, but they need a requirement. We're seeing teachers, in my opinion, who are leaving college and they're not adequately prepared for the students that are going to be in their classroom. And then you look back historically at the teachers that didn't have training, and they're not adequately prepared if they haven't had students like this in the past. So these are questions. My favorite one is, imagine if you got that, what would be taken care of? A parent's most common positional demand is, I want a para for my classroom. I want a para for my child. I want someone to follow my child around and to make sure he's doing his work and behaving appropriately. And let me tell you, for some kids that works, and for some kids it doesn't. When Sammy had a para, when she got to 2nd grade, she told me, and I can't remember how poor her communication was at that time, but it was something like, Nana, can we lose her? And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, she follows me around everywhere. And I said, well, honey, she helps you get your work done. She keeps you on track. And she said, I said, why don't you like her? She goes, she's got bad breath. Well, I found out, it didn't take long, the other kids were noticing that she was the only one that had somebody following her around. And the message was, what's wrong with her that she can't be in here and handle things on her own? She must have some real problems. And we got rid of the aide. I told her, I said, well, honey, we'll lose her. We can lose her, but you have to get your work done every day or she's coming back. And I'm telling you, for the next 3 or 4 years, she would wake up in bed in the morning, sleeping. I have a book report due. She was motivated to get her work done because she didn't want that aide with her. And so there's ways. We don't want children to become dependent on aides. Children need aides when they are unable to do something. But if they're able to learn to do something, we need to be working on training them, because every year is important. You can start as early as you need to, but everything is going to be important that we are helping them function behaviorally appropriate in the classroom. So I want to just go over what we've been talking about. Is called interest-based negotiation. It doesn't aim to change the other person. It aims to change the negotiation behavior. And it shifts it from your position versus my position to you and I against the problem. So it should be trying to define what the problem is so that you can stand together against that problem instead of fighting each other. And it involves a mutual exploration of interests. And it does use objective criteria. And what stands in the way of all this? You know, we have all this research-based, evidence, behavior, training on communication. What stands in the way? Human nature, the human nature of people. And sometimes we have trouble making a difficult situation safe for each other to really talk about the issue. And that's something, I mean, if you're new at this, just say to them, you know, I know that my child has a mental health disorder, and I'm very frightened about how that's going to impact them as a human being. And I have trouble parenting them, and I know that it's difficult for you to parent them. And we need to talk about this kid so that we can work together on this. And I want to talk about it in a safe way. Because as soon as you attack them, it is no longer safe. Just as if they were attacking you on your parenting, it would be no longer safe. And a lot of times parents go in and they think, okay, they put their position forward, they put it again forward, and then they just get angry. And they come out just, you know. And I have a friend who always says, if I was a monster, it was because I was created. And that's true, but how do you overcome that? And that's when we let our emotions take over our heads. And we got to go back and stick to the fact, keep the right motive in our mind. It's about helping this child. It's not about firing people. It's not about getting a pound of flesh out of that principal. It's not about that. It's about the kid. And we've got to keep our focus on that and stay on task. And again, if you can't do this, you need to be asking for an IEP facilitation, because that's why they're there. Because we recognize that people are humans on the school side as well as the parent side. And we don't like to hear parents demonizing school people. And I don't like to hear schools demonize that parent. I don't, when they start calling that parent, or she's calling again, or, oh, they always want to, anyone I talk to wants to try and demonize the other person. We need to seek their humanity. They are humans. They're interacting just like we are. And we need to try to keep an understanding of what that is. What's important that I want to train you is understanding the story. What does this mean? The truth in life. This is just a truth. It is evidence-based, but it's truth. We organize our experiences in a narrative form. If somebody asks you today, well, what was your training about? You're going to give them a narrative of your experience with the training. You might have said, oh, I've heard this 100 times, you know, it wasn't nothing new. Some of you may have say, oh, you know, I never really thought about these things before. It was really interesting. So everybody has their own experience of what happens. And these stories, they help us make sense of our lives. It's what we do because we're trying to make sense of the information we take in and of our relationships with other people. And our stories, they're influenced by social and cultural context. For instance, your feeling about school people sometimes is influenced by the experience you had with school people as a child, or the experience you had with school people in the last IEP meeting. We take those experiences to formulate our story. We act on those stories, and they shape the direction of the plot. And our stories are not designed to tell scientific facts. They're designed to tell what we think is going on, what we are assuming, what we are proposing. And the more you deconstruct this and understand it, the better you will learn to deconstruct your stories and the school story. Chris Argyris is a man who came up with this research-based information. It's called the Ladder of Inference. And we begin at the bottom of the ladder. And as we go up this ladder, things happen. And we observe data. We just walk into, you got onto this chat room today and you looked at how many people are on here. What does this speaker look like? Is that PowerPoint interesting? You started developing your information, and when they told you who I was, oh, well, she's going to have experience or she's not going to have experience. You started developing, you heard this data and you selected that data and added meaning. Oh, she had a family member with schizophrenic. She knows how difficult that can be. Then we had dropped beliefs and feelings about the situation or the purpose. Maybe you thought, oh, she's going to understand. She knows she's still dealing with it with her sister, 70. She's still going through it. And then based on all those beliefs and feelings, we act on that. So your action may have been, oh, I think I'm going to learn something, or maybe this person knows something that's going to be interesting to me. Now, this stuff that we're doing 1 through 5, it happens in nanoseconds. Your mind doesn't really go through, okay, what data am I observing? What am I selecting? What have I added meaning to it? I mean, you're going to find that you just add meaning. Like if you go to the grocery store and you come home and you open the door and there is toilet paper shredded and gone all over the ground, you're going to say, toilet paper, it doesn't belong in here. Something has happened. The dog got a hold of it. That damn dog. Okay, you're going to go through that in just nanoseconds. You know, you don't do it slowly one by one. And then you have a reflective loop. It reflects back again, because then You may see that 3 dogs come out of the back when you only have 2. And you select data. How did my daughter's dog get here? Oh my gosh, the daughter's dog has influenced my dogs. He got the toilet paper out and they had a party. Oh my gosh. Okay, do you see? And it just happens over and over and over. And these are how we create our stories. So the same things happen with us about kids at school. When your child comes home, you observe things, you select data, you add meaning, you have a belief about what's going on, and your emotion acts on that belief. And it goes around until you learn more. This is very powerful stuff. We do a whole crucial conversations training. If you see, we know we'll be doing some this year. We may even do some for, we'll be doing things through the Oklahoma Parent Center, and you may be seeing things put out on our Facebook. We have a Facebook for Oklahoma Special Education Resolution Center. We will put out when those trainings are, but we're being funded. It's expensive training. It's like $300 a person, but it's funded by the State Department. They're wonderful and they pay so you can attend for nothing. We give this to schools and we're trying to give it to parents also. So everybody can be on the same page about stories and deprogramming things. It made more sense to me when I saw Vital Smarts do this, not from the ladder, but through the boxes. That first step is we observe and select data, we add meaning to it, we adopt a belief or feeling, and then we act on those feelings. Conflict stories are stuck stories. When we have stories that are bad and hurt us, and especially with schools, conflict stories become fixed stories. And this goes for anything in your life. It's not just about schools. We create stories about our in-laws, our neighbors. This was so powerful to me. I realized it's why I like NCIS. My husband and I watch it together. And we're like, oh, well, he can't do it. The show's only been on for 5 minutes. There's something else going on. And so you're taking those little clues and you're changing and you're going through those loops over and over to the end. It's why we like to read books. We like, having stories. But conflict stories become simple and fixed. They are bad people. And sometimes, honestly, the stuck story I hear is, this school doesn't care about kids. And that becomes their fixed story. Those fixed conflict stories have judgment and accusations against characters that are tightly woven. So it's that principal doesn't care anything about kids. That teacher is just horrible. She doesn't even like children, doesn't like my child. And we rehearse those stories and we edit them. And guess where you rehearse them? You rehearse them by telling your friends. You rehearse them by getting on social media. Well, this is what happened today. And of course, there's going to be somebody else out there that had a bad experience and they're going to share it with you. And you're going to use that to reinforce your stuck story. And you're going to be like, yeah. And we edit things. Okay, we experience, the person who is telling this story, they experience their story as true. Okay, it's really about their feelings and their judgments and their accusations, but they experience this true. Your school story, the ones they have determined, they experience it as true. You experience your story as true. And there are truths about the storyteller embedded in the story. So the story sometimes tells a lot more about you than it does what the story is saying about. So keep that in mind. We sometimes have to examine our stories. In fact, I will ask you to always examine your story. What else is there you may not have known about? And just by questioning is how we do that. How do we deconstruct the story? And how do you deconstruct your own story? When you're hearing something and you've created a story about this is what's going on, you have to keep in mind, what were the facts? What did you see and hear? What did you tell yourself about that? And how did that story make me feel? How did I choose to act because of that story? What impact did my behavior have on the other people? That's very important. And the alternate story, how might I have chosen to interpret the facts? So those are all really important questions, and we'll see kind of how that happens. So here again, I kind of like it with the arrows. And in reflective questioning, we're going to go back. What did I see and hear? And the example I use is one time the State Department called me and they said, Joanne, we need this information from you, and we need it within 3 hours because the feds have asked for it and we've got to turn it in. And so I contact my secretary.
Joanne, I apologize. I accidentally muted you as I was admitting someone into the room.
But I do want to take this moment to go ahead and let everyone know that we really, our time is almost up here. So those of you that would like to stay and finish, we will keep recording and finish up.
You want me to go faster, Jerry?
Yeah, because it is already 11:30.
Okay, then check here. I wasn't watching the time. I got all into this. Yeah, but keep in mind that you do have these stories, and go back at the PowerPoint and think about these stories. My example was that I was going to give this to my secretary, but she was really busy because we had a bunch of stuff come in. I was really doing nothing. So I kept calling her and saying, do you need help? Well, what she did, the story she told herself was, Joanne doesn't think I can get this done. She was angry with me and she was a little pouty. When what I was really calling about is I was afraid that we had an uneven workload, and I was really wanting her, and we talked about it later, that I would kept calling because I felt so bad that she had all this work and I had nothing. Okay, for some reason I'm not scrolling. Let me try this. There. Okay, so go back and look at this. This was an example. When you do meet with a meeting, I do want you to really define the purpose of the meeting. Why are we meeting today? And really get that purpose defined, because if things get stuck, you can get back to what the purpose is. And sometimes people don't do that in a meeting, and it's really, really important. If they're there to revise a behavioral plan and you get off doing something else, it helps you to know how to get back on track. This is a path. This is something called State My Path. It's from Crucial Conversations. And it really gives you a way to state your position when you're talking, is to begin with a good motive in your heart, to start with the facts. Here's what I know. My child had a meltdown. The classroom was disrupted. They had to take my child out for the safety of the others and clear the classroom. And then you might say, it's starting to appear that my son's behavior is more of a disruption in the classroom than the teacher's able to handle. And I'm wondering, how do you see it? And that gives you a path to start opening, instead of, well, why don't you put my child with a teacher that knows how to handle him? Because the truth is there probably aren't very many or any. Okay, so that's really a good format that is given, and you're trained in Crucial Conversations how to do that. You want to listen and give feedback. So when they're saying, you say that you'd like to place my child homebound until he can behave better, then you need to go and ask again, who will be working with him to learn to behave better? Whoops, I'm almost at the end. I understand your concerns are these things, but my concern is, and this is where you state your fear, if we do remove him, he's not learning how to function with other children. And my child will not have an appropriate access to daily understanding of information in the classroom. Another 3, this is often happens, is, have you exceeded your ability to understand and work with my child at your school? Do you feel the school would benefit from having a behavior consultant? And these questions, is there a place? How long do you think he will be on homebound? Is there a plan in place to put him back? What are you doing with my child? And I say that because that's frequently what schools are doing. How long would my child be at home? Who's supervising the plan? You just go on asking these questions. And once you learn to do that and not be afraid and just get angry that they're doing that, ideas are like rabbits. And when you get a couple of them, then you know how to start asking those questions. And if you don't know what questions to ask, you can always call us. This is my work number and our toll-free number, and you can call at any time to talk. We're happy to help you try to brainstorm what services we could provide, just get you in line in your head about what's going on and where you might be able to go for your next steps.